One of the things that I grew up hearing time and time again from adults to the point it grinded my gears is, "Oh, you're just so mature for your age." But the thing that most people don't get is, most of us had to grow up really quickly. Growing up during such dire circumstances meant that most of us had no choice but to mature. For me, my teenage years were absolute hell. I was dealing with a plethora of issues back then, things like mental health, sexuality, gender identity, just to name a few. Telling me that these are supposed to be the best years of my life was probably one of the worst things you could have said to me. Hi everyone, hope you all are doing well. As of writing this video, it has been 3 days since my birthday! The moment the clock hit 12 AM on 11th of October, I was no longer some angsty modern teenager who is way too sensitive and takes things too literally, but also simultaneously living their best life, because I turned 20. For me, turning 20 has been a much larger milestone than turning 16 or even 18, because it got me thinking retrospectively of the past 6 years of my life. How teenagehood lies between this weird grey area between childhood and adulthood. For me, it meant receiving a lot of conflicting messages from everywhere, where on one end, you were supposed to have your life figured out by 18, have chosen what you wanted to study, what career to pursue, even though up until that point, you needed permission to even use the bathroom. But also, you were supposed to have fun. Go out to these huge, insane parties, rebel and act recklessly by drinking and having sex and pretty much being a hot mess, as these formative years are supposed to be the ones you look back on, making memories, reminiscing the good old days, as these are supposed to be the best years of your life. Let's talk about it, shall we? The media's depiction of teenagers has always been this one thing: drugs, sex, alcohol, reckless driving, huge parties. These are all the things that comes to mind when most people picture teenagers. Teenagers are portrayed as these wild beings that need to be disciplined, to be domesticated, as otherwise they would go out and live recklessly, put themselves in danger, and get themselves killed or seriously hurt. Earlier this year, when Euphoria was trending, there was a lot of discussions in the online space about depictions of teenagers and their unrealistic representations in the media. For those who haven't seen Euphoria, it's like the most stereotypical teenage drama that you can think of. The actors playing as teenagers are in their 20s, there are drugs, there are parties, there is unprotected sex, heartbreak, all those things. But one thing that lingered on my mind as I watched this show, and I know I'm not the only one because I've seen comments and posts here and there affirming this, is why teenagers? Why minors? Because even though this show has young characters, it is not intended for a young audience. This is something that the cast and the director spoke out about multiple times. Many audience members who are adults themselves still found it difficult to watch at times, because without giving too much away, this show is very graphic in their depictions of nudity, drug use, violence. But the thing is, all of these things can still easily apply to college or uni students. In fact, it would be even more realistic, as around 18 or 19 years old, most people leave home for the first time to go live in their college dorm or uni accommodation. They are legally allowed to drink in most places. They are working their first job, or if they were already working, they might work more. So they have this sense of financial freedom that is separate from their parents for the first time. And overall, there is this sense of newfound freedom where they can be their own person, figure out who they are and could be experimental in terms of their identity, which can involve doing drugs, having sex, or drinking. But I think we all know why they would much rather have adults playing as teenagers and going through these things instead of just playing as adults because it creates a shock factor. Say, seeing a 16-year-old girl being so sexualized and getting into drugs and alcohol is far more compelling than an 18-year-old, even though biologically there is very little difference in brain development or maturity. Regardless, I find that adults or public in general have this weird obsession with teenagers and their lives. Most adults seem to have forgotten what it's really like being a teenager. There is this expectation of living your life to the fullest in those 6 years, making all the mistakes, having memories to look back on, and I can't help but to notice how this ideal image of teenagehood that is thrusted onto everyone is predominantly white, cishet, able-bodied, and middle to upper middle class. Where do people like me fit in? As tokens to provide funny one-liners, of course. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some truth to this depiction of teenagers that we see in the media. I know back in the 90s to early 2000s, teenage culture was huge with all the rom-coms and Y2K fashion and music, and many adults who were teenagers back then or earlier, Gen Xers and Boomers, may have actually lived this stereotypical, wild, reckless teenage life. Good for them. But I would argue that people's obsession with teenagers is a cope to deal with their own fear of aging and subsequently mortality. Many adults want to vicariously live their youth through teenagers of this generation, to the point some may even get frustrated when they see you living in a way that is different to how they lived. I have heard this so many times from adults around me growing up. You are still so young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You should be out and about having fun. Why are you so depressed? But the thing is, times have changed, right? The situations and the circumstances that our parents and grandparents grew up in is vastly different to the way things are now. Cost of living has gone up drastically since then. There is the climate crisis, the pandemic is still going on. Things are just a lot more competitive, so there is a lot of pressure at school to get good grades, then getting into a good college or uni, then getting a good job. Most of us just don't have time to live this idealized teenage life that we are supposed to live. And that is just some of the external factors, not to mention the individual struggles and issues that we may be facing in our own personal lives. One of the things that I grew up hearing time and time again from adults to the point it grinded my gears is, "Oh, you're just so mature for your age." Not to mention how creepy this is depending on who is saying this and who they're saying it to, but I don't really want to get into that right now. But the thing that most people don't get is, most of us had to grow up really quickly. Growing up during such dire circumstances meant that most of us had no choice but to mature. And on top of all of that, while I can't speak for everyone, for me, my teenage years were absolute hell. I was dealing with a plethora of issues back then, things like mental health, sexuality, gender identity, just to name a few. Telling me that these are supposed to be the best years of my life was probably one of the worst things you could have said to me, because it scared the living shit out of me. Like, if this is the best that life has to offer, how bad is it going to get? Turns out, saying that you have your whole life ahead of you is not a particularly helpful thing to say to somebody who is on the verge of unaliving themselves, because every single day was a struggle. But older generations typically don't like to acknowledge that. They don't like to admit how good they really had it compared to us, how they grew up during economic stability and a social safety net that allowed them to have fun and really live their teenage years. Instead, they like to blame us for our own predicament. They claim that it is us that is not working hard enough. It's the phones, it's all the screens, it's the pronouns and 76 genders, it's the avocado toast and lattes. That's why we can't afford a house. The snowflake generation, we just need to stop crying about our mental health and pick ourselves up by the bootstraps. This sort of reminds me of how back in the 50s, antidepressants used to get widely prescribed to housewives. Some people have this idea that antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications are this new thing, when in reality, housewives back in the 50s and 60s were frequent users of such medications. Obviously, we now know that it was really how the society was structured back then that was causing all these issues. There is more to a person than being a housewife and being stuck at home doing chores and raising children. They were not at fault for feeling like something is wrong. It's just not how society should be. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that psychiatry is BS and all the mental issues that we have now could be solved if we just tackle social issues. I know people whose lives were saved by SSRIs or the medications that are commonly prescribed for depression and anxiety. However, we are currently at a mental health crisis. Especially among teenagers, the rate at which medications are being prescribed is astronomical. At some point, we have to address that there is a larger issue at play, that it is not normal for so many young people to be living under constant stress. Obviously, there are some older people who do acknowledge all this and are understanding. And conversely, there are also younger people who buy into the whole hustle culture, grind mindset and think that people just need to work harder. But nevertheless, putting such unrealistic expectations on young people when the world is at such a dire state is ridiculous. There is only so many experiences and memories that you can fit within 6 years of your life. Especially for someone like me, I have always been a bit of a late bloomer. It took me a long time to accept that. With all the issues that I have to deal with to this day, I am not always going to be on par with many of the milestones compared to people my age. Things like moving out, getting a job, it's going to take me longer, and even then I still may not be as successful as some of my peers. And this is not me just deciding not to work hard or just giving up and accepting my failure. It's just being realistic. For many people, even just surviving school and being a teenager takes so much effort. On top of that, constantly being told that you're not doing enough, that you're wasting away the best years of your life is extra stress that no one needs. Either bring back the way the world was back in those days, i.e. an economy stable enough that we can actually afford our basic necessities, or change the way teenagers are stereotyped and viewed by everyone. Now, I want to shift my focus a bit and talk about the other end of the spectrum, which is the glamorization of child prodigies or just young people doing spectacular things beyond their age, whether it be academic achievements like getting a perfect SAT score, or in music, with some of the more recent examples like Billie Eilish and Olivia Rodrigo having their age constantly highlighted, or in the Olympics since the beginning of time, with titles like 14-year-old Chinese diver wins gold, or 15-year-old wins figure skating gold, and everyone else is just, oh, this person won gold in ice skating, oh look, this person won gold in swimming. By sensationalizing the achievements of younger people while also undermining those very same achievements when they're done by people who are a bit older, it subtly sends the message that the younger you are when you achieve something, the more valuable it is. Things like Forbes' 30 under 30 list again puts enormous pressure onto people to get their shit together, as if the longer it takes you to do something, the less valuable it is. When in reality, I would argue that the opposite is true. If it takes you a long time to do something, longer than most people your age even, that to me is so admiring because it tells me that you're persistent, that you're dedicated in your craft, that you're willing to work hard. I have known people who would lament every year on their birthday, as each year that goes by, it is another opportunity that is lost to be on Forbes' 30 under 30 list or have their achievements be acknowledged as a young person instead of what it really is, which is just another trip around the sun. You know, as the saying goes, when you're 10, they call you a prodigy. When you're 15, they call you a genius. Once you hit 20, you're just an ordinary person. And you know what? I'm here to tell you today that there is nothing wrong with being normal. All these feelings of inadequacy, feeling that you're not enough, that you're not doing enough, seems to stem from a fear of being normal, even though, statistically speaking, this is where most of us will be. And even if you were one of these incredibly talented young people, then what? The gifted kid burnout is an actual thing. A lot of people who were seen as smart or gifted back in school end up struggling quite a bit later in life. It is common for them to experience burnout, suffer from depression and isolation, as they're often not at the same level as their peers in terms of development in other areas. Even in any other industry, like in entertainment, child actors, for example, have their childhood practically robbed once their talent is discovered. We've seen this with the Olsen twins and countless other examples. As adults, they become dysfunctional and recluse due to all the expectations and pressure placed onto them as children. In the best case scenario, you would probably finish school early, get a decent job, and have your life lined up years ahead of your peers. But then what? If you end up hitting all of your major milestones early, have done everything that is expected of you by the time you're 30, what else is left there for you to do for the next 4 or 5 decades of your life? Again, you probably won't be able to get along with other people your age, so it's going to leave you isolated. Is this really worth it? I really wished people were more realistic about the fate of these child prodigies or just incredibly talented young people, especially if it's something that requires them to be in the public eye. Most of them do not have the experience or the ability to cope with the pressure that comes with being in such a cutthroat industry. While it is cool to have such talents for sure, it is not worth losing your childhood, only to burn out later in life. Both the incredibly talented teenager and the stereotypical wild party all night teenager that are put up on a pedestal by the media, both are pretty rare occurrences that most teenagers would not be able to live up to. People know this, which is why it is used to capitalize off of your insecurities, which is such a horrible thing to do. Bullying and harassment is unfortunately very common in school, so most of us during those years of our lives may have struggled to fit in, may have developed insecurities, especially with the whole cringe culture. Nowadays, you can't even like something without being labeled as cringe, which is one of the main reasons why I would say the awkward phase between prepubescence and adolescence seem to have disappeared. Nowadays, you can't tell whether someone is 13 or 18. Cringe has literally forced people to grow up. But in a world that constantly tells you that you're not enough and makes money off of your insecurities, being yourself, even if you're the most normal, most average person who is a little cringe even, is the best thing that you can do for yourself and others. Going back to Euphoria, I would love a similar show but with adults showing the realism of adulthood, just people in their early to mid-20s living their lives, figuring things out, showing the mundane inconveniences of life that we all have to go through, like job hunting, studying for exams, working shitty jobs, finally moving out of your parents' home only to live in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a shanty town because that's all you can afford. It's not the most glamorous thing, but I would love that. Like, someone make this. I would watch the fuck out of that. So, to wrap things up, does life get better after teenage years? Well, I can't really tell because, like I said, it's only been 3 days since I turned 20 as of writing this script. But if I were to guess, I would say yeah, for sure. It is not that much of a drastic difference, but you have so much more freedom to grow and make mistakes and learn things. Take all the time you need to figure out what you want to do with your life. Don't let anyone tell you that by this point you should have this figured out. No. 90% of the time it's all BS. For me, leaving school and leaving all the people who have made my life miserable behind has been such a relief. Like, looking back, I cannot even imagine how I enjoyed 5 years of that. Now I am no longer in survival mode. Like, I can actually breathe. I don't feel so crazy anymore. For once in my life, I actually feel safe and stable, and that is what made it all worth it for me. Even if I may not have lived the most glamorous teenage life, now I have things that I genuinely look forward to, and that is all that matters to me. So, yeah, that's all I've got for today. This script was very cathartic for me to write, so let me know what you think. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Hopefully the audio is a bit better in this video. I've been seeing all of your comments about it, even if I may not be able to get back to them all the time. Also, some of you have had trouble accessing the Google Doc for my sources, so apologies for that. Even though I can't go back and fix all of them since some of those sources were pretty extensive, I will try to do better in the future. If there is a particular source that you would really like to see, leave a comment below. I will try to get back to you. Hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's, whatever holiday you celebrate. And even if you don't celebrate anything, I hope at the very least you get to have some time for yourself. This may be my last video of the year, so I guess I'll see you next year.